Hello everybody and welcome to my second of 3 videos on the Nikon D3000. In the first video we talked about what everything on the camera is. In this video we'll talk about how to use everything but the menus, which we'll cover in video 3. So let's jump right in because there's nothing we can do on this camera unless it has a battery in it. And we're going to change the battery. So here's the battery door right here. You just push that little release towards the center of the camera and the door will pop open. Next, you just I'll show you that again. Just kind of flick the camera so that the battery pops out a little bit. It shouldn't, if everything is in good shape, shoot out of the camera. And then you just pull it the rest of the way out. You can see here this uses a Nikon ENEL9. This is a rechargeable battery. There are third-party options available for this battery, and I use those as well, and they are just fine. So our battery, we have the dead battery out and back in the charger or in our pocket, whatever. We're going to grab the battery, and the way that it goes in is there's this little lip on the side, or this little edge, overhang, whatever it is, on the side of the battery. It will only fit in one way, like that. Once we have it pushed in, we just push the battery door closed, it clicks into place, and we've changed the battery. A single lens reflex camera. You're going to need to have a lens on this camera to take a photo. So here's the kit 18 to 55 millimeter lens, but let's say we want to change it for the same lens, because I only have the one. Anyway, what you do is to remove the lens, you push the lens release button down right there, rotate counter or anti-clockwise and remove the lens. We're going to grab our other lens. There's a white dot right here on the lens and a white dot right here. Those line up. And then we turn it clockwise until it clicks, and we've changed the lens. The Nikon D3000 uses SD type memory cards. To access that, we push this little door open right here, and now we can access the memory card. To get the memory card out, we push it in and eject it, and then we can pull it out, and then we can transfer the files from the camera to our computer. The D3000, being an older camera, can use SD and SDHC memory cards. It does not support SDXC memory cards, which means you can get pretty inexpensive memory cards for this. Also, it will only go up to 32 gigabytes. If you put an SD card in that is larger than 32 gigabytes, the camera will not recognize it and will tell you that the SD card is full. And I believe that the same thing happens with SDXC cards, though I could be mistaken on that. So the best thing you can do for this camera is get a 32 gigabyte SDHC card, and you'll be just fine for taking photos. This 2 gig card right here can store, well, we'll see in video 3 how many photos 2 gigs can store in different image settings. And then you can just figure out what image setting you have and multiply that by 16 to figure out how many photos you can store of the type of photos you shoot on a 32 gig memory card. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is flash use. There are 2 ways to use a flash on this camera. The first one is with the pop-up flash that you can access by pushing this button right here. It's just fun to do. So here's your flash. The other way you can use a flash is on the hot shoe, which is underneath this cover. There we go. There's the flash hot shoe, and any old flash will plug into it, but you can use much more modern and fancy flashes than this one that I have here. The flash sync on this camera is 1/200th of a second, and as a good rule, if you're going to use flash, a good thing to do is to use manual exposure settings, setting this to 1/200th of a second or slower, and dialing in your settings manually. Some of the scene modes also allow you to use flash as well. Some of them allow you to use just the pop-up or just an on-body flash, a separate flash. So if you're going to be using a flash with the scene mode, we'll go over the scene modes later in this video in some detail, not to the level of detail of what flashes work with each one, but at any rate, you should have a good idea of if you plan to use a flash with the scene mode, you'll want to look up in the manual the specifics of that scene mode and whether or not it allows use of a flash. If you're going to be using a flash, realistically, the best thing you can do is teach yourself how to use one very well in full manual mode, and because this is digital, if you mess up a setting, you can just delete that file and try again. So why is it that the shutter speed, the flash sync speed on this camera is 1/200th of a second? Well, it has to do with the way that the shutter works. The shutter, I'll show you right now. Don't do what I'm about to do. If you look down into the shutter housing right there, you can see that shutter protecting the sensor. And you don't want to ever lift up that mirror unless you know what you're doing, because that is a good way to damage the mechanism. But you can see that shutter housing down there. And that is protecting the sensor, and it will open and close when you take a photo. The flash sync speed being 1/200th of a second means that when you take a photo at 1/200th of a second, the first curtain passes, the entire sensor is open to light for roughly a 200th of a second, and then the second curtain closes, and then they reset like that. Okay, well, what happens if you take a photo at 1/2000th of a second? The first curtain starts to open, and then the second one comes in right behind it. They finish, and then they reset. So at fast shutter speeds, the curtain isn't moving faster, there's just a smaller gap between the first and the second curtain as they move across the film, or the sensor rather. So if you fire a flash at 1/2000th of a second, you might end up with a little sliver of illuminated sensor and image right at the very bottom or top, and then the rest of the image will be dark. So 1/200th of a second is the fastest shutter speed at which the entire sensor is exposed to light. So what happens if you take a photo at 1/4 of a second? Well, the first curtain opens, the entire sensor is exposed to light for about 1/4 of a second, and then the second curtain closes and they reset. So shutter speeds slower than 1/200th of a second are also just fine for using a flash with this camera. Now, one thing about flashes is that the worst possible place to have one is right on top of the camera pointing towards your subject, either with a pop-up or with a third-party flash. If you think about when we see people outside underneath the sun, or outside at night under street lamps, or indoors with lighting above us, we see people lit from above, and so our brains perceive lighting from above as natural and flattering. So when you are taking photos with a flash, you want to try to replicate that. If you have the light right here on top of your lens, the light from your flash will leave your lens, reach your subject, bounce back down to your lens and your sensor. And you can think of that light as coming in like a flat wave and bouncing back, and that flatness will make your subjects look flat. It's not flattering for anybody. So, some techniques to make the most of your flash are to get one that if you want to mount it up here, you can. Just make sure that you can tilt the head of the flash upward so that you can bounce the light off of a ceiling, for instance, or a reflector is an alternative option if you don't have a ceiling above you. Fully articulating flashes don't just tilt, they also swivel. So if you don't have a ceiling, you can bounce the light off of a wall. And if you bounce the light off of a wall, you can come pretty close to replicating a flattering overhead light. Or at least you can get a different type of lighting that is more flattering than straight on. Another thing you can do with this camera is get an RF adapter here and a receiver for your flash, and then you can handhold your flash and use the autofocus on the camera for your photos. And if you handhold your flash, you can hold it up and over your subject if you're close enough to them to get lighting from above. So those are some techniques that you can use with your flash to get the most out of it when you use this camera with the flash. All right, next up, let's talk about the mode dial. That's this guy right here. We're going to cover all of these different shooting modes. Basically, when you scroll through your shooting modes, you're going to get different options for how you can control the camera to take your photos. We're going to start with these four right here, MASP. These are your fully manual, your partially automatic, and your automatic mode. These over here are fully automatic modes. We're going to cover what they do in a moment. Full manual is the best mode for learning because it's going to let you make mistakes. You control the aperture and the shutter speed, and if you goof, you goof, and the camera will do what you say regardless of whether or not it's right. So if we look here on the screen, we can see the information screen. And as I rotate the rear command wheel in full manual mode, I can adjust the shutter speed. And this is what the light meter tells us is needed. There we go, 2.5 of a second at f4.5. But that doesn't let me adjust the aperture. To adjust the aperture, I'm going to hold the exposure compensation button and now rotate the command wheel. And that allows me to adjust the aperture. So full manual mode will let you take full control over your camera's settings. It's just a matter of hitting the buttons correctly as to whether you want to adjust the shutter speed with just the wheel or the aperture by holding the exposure value compensation button and using the wheel to adjust the settings that way. Next is aperture priority mode, and what this does is you select the aperture and the camera will select the best shutter speed for you. And in this mode, the command wheel adjusts the aperture. So basically, whatever aperture you want to use, the camera will then calculate the shutter speed based on the light. This, by the way, is the mode which I do about 90% of my shooting in because it's a very quick mode. I know approximately what the depth of field is going to be based on my settings with the lenses that I use, and I'll let the camera just pick the shutter speed. Generally, for the majority of my work, aperture is more important to me than shutter speed when composing an image. But for those of you for whom shutter speed is more important, shutter priority mode gives you the ability to select the shutter speed with the rear command wheel, and then the camera will pick the best aperture for you based on your selected shutter speed. In both of these modes, if there's a flashing data point, let's say that, for instance, we're in shutter priority mode, and we're going to try to, let's try that again. It says low. It's a little bit of a different layout on this camera. Where it says low, that means there is not enough light to take a good photo with this lens because of the aperture range we have on this lens. So if that says low or high, you could take a photo, but it's not going to turn out well. You'll want to adjust either your shutter speed or your aperture respectively based on whichever mode you're in. Okay, program mode is the camera is going to pick the best aperture and shutter speed for you based on the scene in front of you. It's just a way to learn the interface of the camera without having to worry about more settings, so that's a good thing you can do with it. It's good for quick shooting. You can also do program shifting in program mode. So if we go back here to the LCD again, right now it's telling us 1/2 of a second and f4.5 is what we want for this scene, which is fine. It's just pointing at the desk. If we hold down the EV compensation button and rotate the command wheel, we can force the camera to over or underexpose the image for creative effect. If we don't do that, then the camera will always go for a proper exposure in program mode. Guide brings up a guide right there that you can use to help learn about how to do different things with your camera. Full auto is the camera controls everything you cannot even program shift. The camera is going to look at the scene, do what it wants to do, and you have no input except telling it when to take a photo. No flash, these ones here, by the way, from no flash over through night portrait on this side, these are the scene modes, and these different scene modes have preset algorithms in them that tell the camera how to behave, regardless of what's in front of it. But if you select the correct scene mode for what's in front of the camera, then in theory, you'll get really good results. Honestly, the scene modes, they just are preset controls for all of the different things you can do yourself on this camera. There's no magic in any of these. So if you only ever shot in program, shutter priority, aperture priority, or manual, or even if you only ever shot in manual, you could achieve all of the exact same effects and image quality characteristics as you could with any of these scene modes. There's really no reason to ever use any of these unless you don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of how some of these things work. So let's do exactly that right now. No flash, it's going to disable your flash. So whatever you're shooting, you cannot use a flash. This would be really good at a setting like a museum where flashes are not allowed because they can damage the paintings, or at your kids' play or something like that. This is a portrait scene mode. This is ideal for taking portraits of people. And basically where it works best is at the long end of your zoom lens's range, or with a telephoto lens, something like a 100mm to 200mm lens. This will shoot at a wider aperture, a larger opening to give you a shallower depth of field that's intended just to get your person's face in focus. And you can set it up for success by putting your person at least 10 feet in front of the background behind them, because that will help you get nice blurry out of focus backgrounds. This next one that looks kind of like mountains is landscape mode. Landscape mode is suited for landscape photography. It will disable the flash, or at least it's supposed to. And you want to shoot it at the wide setting of your zoom lens, or with a wide angle lens like an 18 or a 20mm lens. This will give you a deep depth of field by using a small aperture and a longer shutter speed. That's kid mode. Kid mode is ideal for shooting kids, and basically what it's going to do is use autofocus functions to help keep the kid in focus. The difference between kid mode and sports mode, what we're going to see next, is the predictability of the movement of the subject across the scene. Sports mode, or action, gives you a fast shutter speed, which kid mode will also do, but sports mode is going to bias your shutter speed to be as fast as it can be. It's also very well suited for telephoto lenses, or the long end of your zoom lens, by the way. And sports mode is going to try to freeze the motion of the sports that are being photographed. This next one is macro or close-up photography. It works best with a telephoto lens, a macro lens, or the long end of your zoom lens. And what this is going to do is try to focus the camera to within a foot of the subject, or as close as the lens will focus, so that you can get a small subject like a flower or an insect or whatever, or a penny if you photograph coins, into as much of the frame as possible. And this last one here is night portrait, and what this is for taking a picture of a person at night. This will give you a long shutter speed with a flash. The ideal use for this is, let's say you're out and you have a cityscape in the background and you want to get a photo of that city behind your friend. You tell them to stand still for a long exposure. The flash fires, the person in the foreground is illuminated, and then the shutter stays open to capture the lights from the cityscape or the bridge or whatever it is in the background. This will probably not work for Milky Way photos, by the way. Just a heads up. So what this is going to do is take a long photo. Now, a tip for this is you want to use a tripod, and you also want to have your subject not move until you tell them to when the exposure is done. And the reason for that is that if they move after the flash fires, then the lights that are behind them in the city will shine through where they were, and it will make it look like they have lights shining through them in the photo that you take. Next up, let's talk about the function button, which is this button right here. And by default, it switches from your current selected shooting mode to self-timer. In video 3, I'll show you a function button adjustment that will let you select the specific function that you want this button to do. So this isn't just switching from self-timer. It can switch between any two modes that you specify, but that is the one thing that it does, switching between two modes. This info button up here turns the display on and off. I'll show you. Push the info button and the display pops up and shows you the information about your camera's settings. Next up is the auto exposure lock, auto focus lock button. The way that it works is that if you are set to AFA or AFC, which are autofocus automatic or autofocus continuous, if that's at AFC, then what happens is when you push this button, the camera will lock the focus. So if you're using one of those autofocus modes and you get focus on your subject and they're about, and you're comfortable and they're stationary, what you do is you hold the AFL button down, and that will keep the autofocus from shifting. So basically, it's ideal, let's say you're on a walk with someone and there's like a sailboat in the background, or a nice view, a mountain, a bridge, I don't know, whatever. Something neat in the background. what you do is you're using AFA or AFC for your autofocus, and you try a couple times, and instead of focusing on the person, it focuses on the thing in the background. Maybe they're standing in front of a sports car. It's your wife, and you're like, oh, hey, sports car. Let's take a picture of my wife in front of the sports car. But the camera keeps focusing on the sports car. We've all been there. And you're going to get in trouble if that's all that you get. So what you want to do is you want to use this button when your AFA or AFC setting locks on focus of the person you're with. You hold this button down, and then the focus will stay at that person. You can then recompose the scene however you want and take the photo. So a good way to use this is to compose your image so that your person's face is in the center. Lock on focus, move and hold this down, move the camera to get the person over to the side, let's say, and then whatever interesting thing is in the background over here, and then continuing to hold this down, take the photo. Your person will remain in focus. You'll get the image composed the way you want, and your autofocus will not automatically lock on whatever is in the background in the center of the frame. So that's really all of the buttons on this camera. The only thing we haven't done is talk about how to take a photo. It's pretty easy. Just like that. You hold the shutter button down until the focus on your autofocus lens locks, or if you're using manual focus, you focus yourself, and then you just take the picture. And whatever mode you have set the camera in, whatever settings you're using, then the camera will take the image based on the settings that we've gone over already in this video. So the real important thing is that as long as you understand what's going on up here and how your autofocus is working, you're going to be in pretty good shape to take really good photos with this camera. So this was video 2. In video 3, we're going to put this camera upright and look at everything in the menu button right here. Thank you everyone for watching. If this video was helpful and useful to you, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track and that I'm producing and creating content which is helpful to you. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about responding every couple of days and answering whatever questions you have to the best of my ability. If you'd like to subscribe to find out when I have more videos about how to use cameras, photographic techniques, or the best practices for the tools of the trade, by all means please subscribe and check that notifications bell to be alerted when new content arrives. If you'd like to support the channel by joining with a membership, there are now membership options for this channel at different tiers that will give you different benefits if you would be interested in that. And one last thing, thank you everyone very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos. Won't we, Steinbeck? What's that look about?